Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our friend, Brian Hoffman of OB1! Come up here. There you go. All right, let's grab that.
Thanks.
How's it going, Brian?
Good. I sure hope we win the World Series. That'd be nice.
Are you? You're a Virginia native here.
Yeah.
Are you a Redskins fan?
Unfortunately, yes.
So, you more of a Redskins fan than a Nationals fan, or now you're more of a Nationals fan than a Redskins fan?
That's a tough one. I mean, the Nats weren't always here, so yeah, Redskins first, of course.
Okay.
Still.
Yeah, we're very happy that you made it out here, and hopefully we'll be very jovial in the next 2 weeks when we win the World Series. So, we're going to start our interview. We always like to go from way back. I think it's really interesting the stuff that you were working on. I think it's great, but I think what's really important is to understand where and the founding of the company, and sort of like understanding the background of the founder is just as important. So let's just go all the way back. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And what was your first entrepreneur experience? Start with you.
So I was born in Southern California, in San Diego, and my father was in the military, so we moved around a lot, and he ended up retiring here in the DC area, which is why I'm here. Both my parents not technical, but obviously growing up in like the Napster age and stuff, it was kind of hard not to be a part of that, and ended up going to school at JMU for computer science, and that was just not super stimulating. I mean, just because we really wanted to push the edge of what we were doing, and so a couple friends and I, we just like got out as soon as possible, and I went to work at Booz Allen, which is kind of like getting sucked into the governmental Borg here in DC, like right away. I was envisioning going back to California, but that never happened. Yeah. But I was doing some really cool work at Booz Allen, mostly working with like classified agencies and Department of Defense, doing encryption and public directories, identity, biometrics, things like that, which is kind of how I stumbled into what I'm doing today. So.
And then you actually, so eight years at Booz Allen, right?
Yep.
And I feel like that story kind of resonates, especially in this area, because there's a lot of GovCon background, like a lot of folks that come from that area, like they kind of feel like, oh, you know what, I'm very comfortable here. Maybe this whole startup thing is not really meant for me, right? So for you, how did you decide to like make that leap from, very traditional and cushy job, steady paycheck, to now a startup? Like, was that a big leap for you?
Well, so I came out of school, I went to Booz Allen, I was there for about a year and a half, and I quit and actually joined a startup. And it was really fast-paced. Did a lot of commercial work, flying all over the place, working with like Neiman Marcus and FedEx and all this stuff. And it was kind of crazy. I mean, I wasn't even married at the time, and it seemed crazy. But then it got bought by Deloitte, and it kind of turned back into a big company. And I ended up coming back to Booz Allen, and I spent about 7.5 years doing that. And so I kind of got to see both sides, but I don't really think that it was like a draw to doing a startup that was necessarily so appealing, because I think within some of these big companies you can kind of build your own practice and start your own business segment. But what I was doing in Booz Allen, and as I became more interested in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and trying to foster that kind of excitement within Booz Allen, it just wasn't happening. And it was pretty clear that if I wanted to do something in that industry, because of the nature of it being so kind of rebellious and not really something that the government was looking at in a positive way, at least, it just made sense to try and figure out a way to get out of there and do something on my own.
So I actually looked at your LinkedIn profile and saw the different companies you had, startups before OB1. You had one called Shout Central, another one called Movie Tracker, and the third one I kind of wanted to ask you this, but you have this thing called mypersianbuddies.com. Like, what was that all about?
Yeah, my wife is Iranian, and she's of Iranian descent, but she was born here. But I think that kind of, you have to see like the progression. So Shout Central was kind of like when social networking and plugging into different APIs for different services was kind of like getting off the ground. This is before Facebook even existed, I think. And it was just like, well, how do we tie in all these different web services and create this cool social network? It wasn't that great, but it was kind of stimulated the thinking around building composable services from different things. Movie Tracker was kind of an attempt to do what Netflix was trying to do before they were doing it, which was looking at the context around different movies, trying to look at them, you know, who are the actors, what is the genre, all these things, and then allowing people to kind of track what they were watching and then make a suggestion, which seems silly now because it's like so commoditized, but at the time it wasn't really happening. And it actually got written up in the New York Times and they said it was really horrible, but, but it was in the New York Times, so it felt like some sense of accomplishment. My Persian Buddies was kind of like, okay, these concepts are too broad, and like trying to get everybody on the planet to do something is really hard. You have to kind of look and find a niche audience and figure out how to take that technology to them and get a really passionate user base. So my wife was Iranian. She was going to events all the time. These people were very passionate about being part of their community, and it seemed natural to kind of take the tech and see if it would work within that group. And it actually worked pretty well for a while, but it got too insane. I mean, I had to go to Persian events every weekend and promote the thing, and it was just like, it was crazy. I was like becoming Persian. So, but it then started interfering with work, and I kind of backed off of it. But it was a really interesting lesson in like how to start self-promoting your service, how to build it, how to maintain all that stuff, how do you do customer support, because it started to get so many users, you can't handle all the emails, and yeah, so it was a good lesson to learn.
So that was actually going to be my next question, like, and you just answered it, like all that experience that you had with the startups, how did it, now we're going to the OB1 story with OpenBazaar, like how did, that obviously gave you some training wheels to actually run this company. And before we get into OB1, just wanted to let you know, hashtag #StartupGrind at OB1 company, right?
Yes.
So take out your Twitter clients and start tweeting out. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the aha moment of OB1, right? What was it? Like how did it start? And give us the whole story behind that.
Sure. So Bitcoin, especially back in 2012, 2013 when I started looking at it, was notoriously hard to get to be a collaborator. In fact, I had looked at the code and was kind of poking around and tried to submit some code to them, and they just immediately dismiss it. You have to, I mean, the really, really smart guys, the core developers. And so I was desperately looking for some way to kind of do more in the space, but that was obviously not happening. And so I spent a couple of years, I actually had like a meetup in Northern Virginia for cryptocurrencies, and it was getting, some traction. And we were having fun doing that, but I really wanted to build a business or do something like that. And in 2014, early 2014, there was actually a conference up in Toronto, and they had a hackathon. And there were a bunch of people vying for this $10,000 cash reward. And the winning project was something called Dark Market. And the idea was, it was thought up by a guy named Amir Taki, who's kind of notorious in the crypto space as being kind of like a rebel. I mean, in fact, I think 2 years ago, he went and actually fought with the Kurds against the Syrians. Like, he's like that passionate about freedom and like, governments and things like that. And he came up with this idea. He said, look, the Silk Road got shut down 6 months ago, and it was shut down because it was centralized. There was one guy running it, there was one server running it in Iceland, and they just kind of took it off the thing. And so this libertarian dream of having a free marketplace for the whole world using Bitcoin just kind of overnight disappeared. And he wanted to know, like, how do we take the technologies that are out there, piece them together, and build something that's unstoppable? How do we take technology behind something like BitTorrent, which is, still up and no one can really stop it, for file sharing? And how do we take Bitcoin, which is an unstoppable money, and piece these things together and create some kind of marketplace? And so that was kind of his 24-hour hackathon project. And it won. And so he open sourced the code, and I actually thought it was pretty fascinating to create a marketplace, and it seemed like something new that I could probably get involved and just kind of see what's, kind of get my feet wet. And
were you a contributor to this this repository when they opened it?
Yeah, so I tried to, but I emailed Amir and I said, hey, what can I do to help? And he said, nothing. We're not doing it anymore. He's like, I'll be honest with you, I only wanted $10,000 so I can go start this like money laundering wallet project that I want to do called Dark Wallet. Which was like, okay, cool. Can we use the code? And he's like, sure, it's yours. And he like transferred it all over to me. So spent a couple of weeks like poking through it, and it was kind of garbage. I mean, the idea was good, but the code was just not usable. But the thing was, I started soliciting input from others and collaborators, which is one of the great things about open source code, is that anybody can participate, and it just started growing and growing and growing.
Okay, so before you go on, again, this was at the cusp of Silk Road was shut down, and then now here comes a hackathon and with Amir saying, hey, this revolution needs to still continue, right? Decentralized Silk Road. What you learned from Silk Road was it was centralized, they shut it down, so let's now create a decentralized system where they can. So Silk Road 2.0.
Yeah.
And then, so now you got that idea. Was it hard to pitch everyone in the community to say, hey, would you like to, like for a better word, work on Silk Road 2.0?
Well, I mean, I think, I think on its face, it's like, okay, it's Silk Road 2.0, which is kind of what people think of. But for me, when I saw it, I said, well, shit, I know tons of people that want to sell things with Bitcoin, and there was actually a marketplace that was actually starting to get a lot of interest right before Silk Road opened up that was just selling like collectibles and like eBay style stuff called BitNet, I think it was. And it just shut down. I guess the guy got tired of running it or whatever. But there were a lot of people that wanted to use that service. And then I said, well, what's stopping this marketplace from being used for just anything? I mean, people have crypto, they want to spend it, they want privacy. Why does it have to just be focused on negative things?
But was it because like they wanted to spend their Bitcoin versus like going on eBay, spending fiat, right? Was that one of the main drivers? Like, hey, I have some Bitcoins, I want to be able to spend it.
Yeah, I mean, I think back then is a much different mentality towards crypto than there is today. Like today, there tends to be more of like a speculative nature. A lot of like people think of it as more of like opening an E-Trade account and just having it and holding on to it or investing it somewhere or like doing margin trading with it. But back then, I mean, everybody was like, go to your local retailer, tell them they accept Bitcoin, everyone wants to spend it, and the fees were like zero. It was like less than a cent at the time. So it just seemed like a much more natural thing to buy and sell things with it. And so, yeah, that niche audience was asking for that.
So I'm just trying to like understand this, where you got pretty much, which is an open, decentralized, people download it. How did you even think about like the business model behind this? Because eventually you'll have to raise money, and I'll get to the ICO question too, right? But like if here you have pretty much like an open source software, like what was going through your mind about like how is this really going to be making money?
I mean, to be honest, I wasn't. I mean, I had a good job at Booz Allen.
Yeah.
It was a side project. I didn't really think of it as a business. But that started in April of 2014, and then by probably August or September, we had like 600 contributors writing code, like asking to merge code into our repository and participating and saying we should do this, we should do that. And I had a kind of a little team that I was working with, and it basically come home from work and work on this till 3 in the morning and get up at 7 and go back to work again and do that over and over and over again with kids.
Yeah.
So it just became untenable. So then that's when the kind of the idea of like, well, is this something we want to do for real, or is this something that I need to like back off and let other people kind of run? And I spoke with a couple guys within our team that I worked with closely, and I said, are you guys ready to do this? Because they all had jobs too. And we were like, okay, let's do it. But at the time, there was no real concept of like ICOs or crowdfunding really. I mean, like Amir, who did Dark Wallet, I think Dark Wallet did a Kickstarter or something, and they raised $30K, and that was like the biggest thing that had raised in the crypto space until then. Which is just like, none of us are going to quit our 6-figure jobs to go work for $30,000. Like, how long are you going to go? So yeah, that became, then it started to figure out like, well, how do we get some money to do that? And then that's where venture capital kind of came in.
So again, it's like, I always like, in my head, figure out when these companies are saying, hey, we should go, I mean, now it's a little different, it's a different environment now, because it's like, I mean, in 2017 was like, okay, I can do an ICO, here's a white paper, market the crap out of it, and then, you know, have people buy into this, right? When you're thinking about like, how do I raise money now from a venture capitalist, right? Like, what was that story that you sold to like the Mark Andreessen, the Union Ventures? Like, was it like, because even then, I mean, I've been reading, you know, Fred Wilson's blog, and they're like, well, we don't know yet, right? They're still trying to figure it out. What was the sort of the story you sold them to eventually put in? Was ultimately, you know, according to your Crunchbase, was 10.5 million, but you told me something else on Twitter.
9.25, yeah.
9.25, okay, but that's still a lot of money. So, I mean, that $9 million, $10 million, like, how did you convince them to put that much money in?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I've learned about working with investors, and we have 8, I think, on our cap table now, is that you generally don't do a good job of like selling investors if they're not already thinking about it, or if they're not already interested in that. And so, you know, it's kind of an uphill battle to tell somebody about crypto when they don't really care. And I meet a lot of investors. Like, I've gone and talked with big investors like Benchmark and Lightspeed, and, you know, they're super curious, but they're not really that interested in investing because it's too risky for them. And so you kind of have these conversations you realize are going to go nowhere. But there are some investors that are like super cutting edge and like really think more about where the future of stuff is going rather than like what can succeed right this second. You know, what's another food delivery startup, or like, you know, Uber for this or whatever. And so when we were looking for investment, I was kind of just looking around for investors that actually seemed to be writing about crypto and like seemed really interested in engaging with the community and wanted to know more. And I came across a blog post on USV, Uniscore Ventures blog. It was basically saying someone is going to figure out how to take all the cool things about dark markets, dark net marketplaces, illegal marketplaces with crypto, and they're going to bring it into the real world, and they're going to destroy Amazon and these incumbents by taking the cool things about this future technology and like bringing it in. And I was like, wow, it's just crazy the overlap on what we were doing. And so I just emailed them and I was like, you know, we're nobodies, but, you know, I would love to get some feedback on what we're doing. And one of the associates wrote me back and was like, yeah, sure, I'll do a Skype call with you and like hear what you guys are doing. So we had like they scheduled like 15 minutes to chat, which is like barely enough to introduce yourself, but take it. And like around dinner time, and we talked with them for about an hour and a half. Okay. About all this stuff, and it was just like back and forth, and they were like, "What do you do this? We do that," and we were like, "All right, cool," you know. And they're excited. And he's like, "But we could never invest in this. This is like too ridiculous. Like, we'll try to introduce you to some people that maybe like don't care about going to jail." And we were like, "Okay, I guess thanks," you know. And so we were just happy to have the call. But like around 2 a.m, the associate private messaged me on Twitter and said, "Come to New York, like tomorrow. Like, we might be interested in investing." And I was like, "We don't have a pitch deck, we don't have anything, like nothing. Like, we're literally just talking to them." And they were like, "Doesn't matter, come on." So we rode the train up to New York, and you know, we're like waiting outside the glass doors, and they're like, the SoundCloud team is there, and they're like talking with SoundCloud, and we're like, "Holy shit, it's SoundCloud," you know. And then we went in, and we had a conversation, and it was like really brutal. It was really brutal. They were like very hard to like, "You don't have a business model, you can't do this, you can't do that. What are you going to do about drugs? What are you going to do about this?" Like, they were trying to like put ourselves against each other too. Like, well, he doesn't seem to agree with you. Like, what are you going to do about that? And it was really like crazy experience. And we rode the train back like thinking it was over. But the following week they got back to us and they were like, "We're in. Let's talk numbers." So did Mark
Mark Andreessen's fund, did they do the same thing to you, or did they co-invested? What was it?
That one's even crazier.
Was it? Okay, let's hear that.
So we went through the process of like kind of negotiating our seed round with Union Square, and we got a term sheet from them, and we were getting ready to go forward with that, but then Fred Wilson called me, which is already crazy, and he's like, hey, I'm on the board of Coinbase. I don't know if any of you have heard of Coinbase, but like the biggest crypto company right now. And he's like, we're at the board meeting, and I ran into Chris Dixon over at Andressen Horowitz, and
he's a big proponent for crypto.
Yeah, he runs A16Z crypto. They have like a separate fund now, and he said, he goes, I just happened to mention to him that we were extending a term sheet for OpenBazaar, and he said, oh, I want in. And he was like, do you want Andreessen on your cap table? And I was like,
is that even a question?
Yes. So that was like it. Like there was no formal offer. Like Fred just said, do you want him in? And we did like a quick Skype call with him, and he was like, I have to go to dinner now, but it's great meeting you. Let's do it.
So this is what's really fascinating, right? Like it got in through an analyst, and then they grilled you, and then here next thing is Fred is now vouching for you, with A16Z, right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing about VC is that they tend to follow each other. Yeah. So if you find like a big fish, then a lot of little fish will come to try and follow on and get part of that. But I think, Andreessen Horowitz and Union Square Ventures were two firms that were actually very much thinking about crypto, and it wasn't just random. Like they were already meeting at Coinbase, which was already considered a risky investment, even though it was the best in the space. So that was really exciting. So
now we got the VC out of the way, because there's a lot of questions about that, right? Like, getting equity raises versus an ICO. Are you guys maybe still thinking about doing, issuing your own coins in the future?
We actually built our coin this year. We had an idea about releasing it, and we pretty much got all the way to...
Can we get some airdrops in this room? Give us some free coins?
Well, that's the thing, is like, we started to talk kind of with legal around what we wanted to do, and the lawyers were getting very nervous about it, and it was a very frustrating process because they didn't really want to give us a path to like doing it.
Okay.
Like we were like, how do we do this? Can we do it like this? Can we do it like that? And then they would walk through why it was a bad idea. And then we talked with other lawyers, and then they would walk us through why it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
And then finally I remember just saying, like, guys, stop. Like, we want to do it. How can we do it? And they're like, we don't really have a good answer for you. And so we got nervous about it and decided not to release it. And I mean, it's not something that I think is unwarranted. I mean, I'm friends with Ted, who's the CEO of Kik, who, if you've been reading news about that, they just got blasted by the SEC for like $100 million, and basically had to like lay off 90% of their workforce so that they could try and regroup and figure out what to do. And
EOS just got a slap on the wrist, right?
EOS is a special case, though. I mean, they raised over $4 billion, but which is insane. But there's a lot of like constraints around it. I won't pretend to be a legal expert on that, but they weren't even selling to people within the U.S. as far as I understand, and so the fines seem to be reflective of that and very small. But the ones that we're doing in the U.S. are very much at risk. But then there's some that just completely have no issue. So the fact that there's so little clarity in terms of regulation, it's just, we're not like trying to spend our whole lives and time not building product, not getting users, not growing a community, and focusing on legal battles,
So for the time being, no, but there could be a possibility for a token. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's too much potential there. It's just it's a shame that there's no certainty around the legal parts of it to allow people to do it.
So I didn't want to go backwards there, because like people are like, why would I go invest in this token? Well, let's talk about the value prop of what you guys are building now, because this is the crux of what I want to talk about, right? Like when you see the Silicon Valley episode, and you're like, it comes out, it's like, we have all these phones, and just download the app, and then now you are an active participant, right? So. Let's talk about the products you have now, right? You got OpenBazaar.com, OpenBazaar.org, and then Haven, right? Those three. So let's talk about that, and then I want to get really into nitty-gritty about each of those. So what are they? What do you do?
Sure. So So basically, it started out as a desktop app. It's called OpenBazaar, and you can still download it. Obviously, like it's still one of our big things. But and what it is it's just like a server that runs on your computer and it talks to the network. And we did it this way from the beginning because it's very hard to write that kind of software for mobile, for web. It just doesn't exist. So and if any of you guys use BitTorrent at all, you'll notice that like it's taken a long time, but a lot of BitTorrent clients are now web apps instead of like actual apps you download on your computer, because everybody uses the web, right, or mobile. But it's taken a long time to get there, and that's kind of the same situation. So we built a desktop app to kind of prove out what we were doing. And then we built OpenBazaar.com, which is basically, it's just like a read-only view of the network, so you can go on there and you can see what's for sale and the prices and who's on there, but you can't buy or sell anything on it. It's just for looking, basically browsing. It's kind of a compromise to get on the web. But we did just release an app called Haven on August 1st, and that basically provides all that functionality but in the mobile app, and it's on iOS and Android.
Okay, so I want to talk about Haven, because I feel like this is on the cusp of something very revolutionary. Well, you saw on Silicon Valley episode, he mentioned it, but then if you ever see in the sphere, right, just in the ecosystem, not many companies were building something what he had envisioned until you guys released Haven. So tell us what Haven is, right? Because it's like, now I have a decentralized system run by mobile apps. The very fact that you download it, and how many apps have we downloaded that we kind of forgot, right?
Yeah.
Like the censorship resistance of like having a mobile app running, OpenBazaar, it's like astronomical. I mean, just the implications. Are you guys eventually going to expose APIs, like sort of like creating infrastructure where other people can now put in their own version of UX on top of like, what you guys built out for your decentralized system?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. I think a lot of people working on this problem were kind of ahead of the game in some respects, because almost 100% of your apps on your phone are basically like just talking to some data center somewhere where that company or that app is like running all their services, right? So you lose your internet and it stops working, right? But in our case, not that it runs without the internet, but it essentially everything is running on your device. So if you're going to create a storefront and you want to sell things, it's like running an entire web server and e-commerce store on your phone, because none of that data, like there's no registration process. If you use the app, you turn it on and it's like, welcome to the network, and you're just on. And all of your security keys for your wallet, everything is all on your device. The money you earn is on your device. The personal information is on your device. All your sales data, your purchase data is on your device. It doesn't ever go off your device, which is pretty revolutionary. Most people don't do that.
So if you guys don't understand what he's talking about, like that there's like an underground community, like the BitTorrent and Onion sites, where you can, if you go in there, you will actually see decentralized versions of whatever is out there. So like there's a decentralized version of YouTube, like it looks like YouTube. You go in there, you'll see videos, but it's not centrally located anywhere. The content is spread out to all the clients, right? The problem with BitTorrent is I feel like it's kind of hard to use, right? With Haven, like as a customer, I just download this app, and then now like I'm on a decentralized system. Like and to me that's what, like, do I care whether it's decentralized or not? No, right? Like I just want to get to my content. Now I want to ask your opinion about this. As we're going and progressing, right, now with Mark Zuckerberg talking, I don't know if you guys saw his like Freedom Manifesto, everybody's calling his bullshit, right? with all the data that they store. Now there's a whole delete Facebook movement, and hey, we don't want to put our stuff onto Facebook, but we still want to have control of our data, and we want to make money off our own data. Could there be a potentially like a truly decentralized Facebook, whether it's your system or systems out there that make this possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's. I was actually in Japan last week, and I was talking to this guy who's working on basically what it is like let's say you have a medical record, like your medical records, and you go to the doctor, and like right now, basically the doctor, it gets access to it, and he sees everything, right? Like even your dentist can get access to like all this stuff, right? Or at least it's like not that difficult. But he has been working on a technology where you can only expose certain pieces of data to people. Or like, let's say they just want to know your gender and your age, and you can release that. And you certainly, in the future, I think through tokens and things like that, there may be ways to monetize that kind of thing. You know, if you want to, Brave browser, if you've ever used the web browser Brave, they have like an attention token. So it's like a way for you to get rewarded for seeing ads and things. So it's like flipping the model. You know, you're not being exploited, you're actually earning stuff for those advertisers' attention. So I think there's all kinds of different efforts to like try and monetize your data. And, you know, certainly there's a lot of, I mean, people are making a lot of money off of our data and we don't even realize it. I was at a summit yesterday in Toronto actually, and this woman, she runs the largest mall in Canada. And she said that basically the second you walk into the mall, they detect your cell phone. And they monitor your phone throughout the entire mall, how long you spend at each store, where you go, what you do, if you go to the bathroom, whatever. And then, when you leave the mall, this is where it gets more interesting. They have a partnership with a weather app, and if you use the weather app, they detect your cell phone going home, and going to restaurants, and going to the movies, and like going to work, and then going back to the mall, and like there's all this crossover to data sharing, and they're paying for it, because it's very valuable to them. But users don't even know it's
and the mediary, the folks in the middle are all capturing that money for themselves, not bringing it back to you, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you this specific question because, like, I was wondering, like, how can I get someone like my mom to get onto like a decentralized Facebook, right? What would it incentivize her to do it, right? Because she doesn't care, like, whether Facebook is on central or decentral. And then the thought came to my mind. I was like, oh, I can definitely see her using this if I told her how much her profile was worth, right? Because she spends a lot of money and you know, getting her data in front of like a car company, right? Like how much are they willing to pay for that, right? So in my mind, I was thinking her profile, you know, older woman, you know, with a lot of money, from retirement, whatever, like there's a pile of cash. How much money is her profile worth? I think it's probably like, if I showed it to her that her profile is worth like 10 grand, right?
Yeah.
She would be on that system like in a heartbeat, right? Even if it was like maybe for a couple thousand, she would be on that system, right? Do you see like a future like that where now generally these values that were not exposed to the public now can somehow be exposed or show that here's some value of your profile, whether it's like a $10,000, you know, value, and then now you're able to capture this somehow through a mechanism, through a decentralized. So again, I'm on Facebook, but then there's value attached to it, right? Like I can see it every time I click on something, there's a balance that keeps on like increasing or decreasing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is like a very challenging problem, right? So why do people use services? Well, because all your friends are there and there's some level of traction, you know, like Facebook, you gotta have one, or Instagram. Then there's like the user experience, right? It can't be like some kludgy piece of garbage or like nobody's gonna wanna use it, they'll abandon it right away. So those are the two primary things that most people think about. But I think if we wanna get to a place where people are able to monetize themselves more, then we have to start teaching people how they're being exploited now. And the only way to do that is to start doing all these things that expose how our data is being used. Like Safari browser now will tell you which other websites are tracking you. If you visit CNN, it'll say, oh, hey, Facebook's tracking you. These guys are tracking you.
Can you put a value to that? Like so then it's exposing this, like how much money is being made by the middlemen. And now it's like, well, do you want this? Because now you can now go to this decentralized system, and then you can have that value. You can capture that value for yourself.
I think you have to figure out a way to establish what that value is, right? Like, so for instance, so farmers are now having an issue where restaurants and supermarkets like Walmart and stuff, their customers want to know what's the provenance of beef or like a vegetable, right? Like, is it organic? Where's it coming from? Who is the farmer? And so Walmart and these groups are coming to farmers and saying, hey, you have to have this data. You got to track this data. I want to know how heavy was this cow that you just sold us and all this stuff. And farmers have all this data, right? It's becoming more obvious that it's valuable. And so what consultants are telling farmers is that Walmart's going to come and say, I'm not buying your stuff unless you give me this data for free. Or you can monetize it now. And they have to establish a market price for that data. They have to realize that that's valuable and then go and sell that and kind of make it part of the process. And so users, I think, have to start saying, look, I'm not going to put every one of my photos up on Instagram unless I'm getting, it's getting monetized. Or if they're doing YouTube and they're getting demonetized, or they're like, they need to start exerting more pressure onto other platforms and things. And that's where decentralized software can really kind of fix this problem, because now there's not some centralized gatekeeper to say, hey, we're going to keep taking away your profits, or we're going to like lower your affiliate revenue or whatever, and then basically screwing people out of their businesses.
So one of the things I always say, that the centralized system, the advantage is, if you're running a centralized system, you can always work, or you can always have the asymmetric data, right? As in like, and so, for example, I'm not going to expose how much I'm making money off of your Facebook profile if I was Facebook. I would never expose that data, right? But in decentralized, you can see that. One of the biggest trends right now in the whole blockchain space is what they call this decentralized finance. And the whole concept of this is exactly this, is about, here's your money, the bank has your money. The question is that the bank will never tell you how much they're making off of your, so if you have $100,000 in the bank, they're never going to tell you like how much they're making off of that money. They're just going to say, we're just going to give you 2%, right? But the DeFi is, we're going to give you, like, you are now the bank. If now there's laws that says, bank, you need to show how much money you're making off of everyone's account here, then there's going to be, I think that there's going to be a movement of people like, F this. I want to go now to the system, and I want to make that money, right? Because Wells Fargo, whatever, these banks are not going to give me that money, even if I try to ask for it, right?
Yeah.
So the whole DeFi is like, now you're the bank. So it's the whole the middlemen. Now you're trying to take that value, some of that value back. So this is why I'm just trying to ask about this whole decentralization, because that's the crux of decentralized finances. It's now, instead of giving that money to the bank, you are now you're the bank. You're taking some of that profit for yourself. Instead of making 2% of the savings, you're now making 10, 15%, because the bank was making that much money. So
I think that an interesting example of that is DAI, which is DAI, which is basically a stable coin, which means that the price never changes like Bitcoin does. It always stays pegged to $1, US dollar, or right around there. And they actually there's a service called Compound, which allows you to deposit your DAI into this bank account, and they pay you interest. And you can actually see your interest accruing every minute. Like it's all done, and it's all done with smart contracts, so all the code is open source. You can see exactly how they do it, how they calculate it, and you can see these payouts. And and then these kinds of networks, they can't just change the interest rate on you like it's part of the community, right? There's a governance model where like all these decentralized players have to get together and say, hey, we're going to change the way that this works. And so there's a much more fair, democratized way of like changing the rules, rather than a bank saying, hey, we're not doing well, tomorrow we're only going to give you 1% interest instead of 4% or whatever. And it also has the benefit of being very like micro level. Like you can literally loan $100 for like 10 minutes and then come out.
Yep.
Instead of like getting paid every month or every quarter or whatever. So
we totally went off the rails. Like I had a whole bunch of questions. I didn't even ask any of these questions. I just want to make this as useful as possible for the people in this room, right? If they're going to be creating a Haven version, right? Not Haven itself, but like a decentralized version of whatever it may be. Do you have maybe some framework for these folks in the room to keep in mind? Like, does it make sense to have a decentralized Twitter or decentralized Google Maps or decentralized whatever it may be? Like, what do they have to be thinking about? Because I believe that this is the next wave of apps because of data, and data is basically the new oil of the internet. Like,
Yeah, I think there's a wide spectrum of centralized to decentralized and how you want to build like an app. And I think you have to look at it and say, well, what kind of a user experience do I want to provide people? What am I trying to accomplish with this? You know, if you're trying to create you know, a lending platform that is global and anybody can use it and there's like no restrictions, you know, let's say you're doing a betting platform and there's like legal limits here and they're different and it's confusion around the world and you don't want it to get shut down, then you probably want to go completely decentralized and like build that out. It's much more complicated. But if you're just trying to build like a gaming platform or something and you want to use a token, perhaps there's a way where you have more of like a centralized app, but it's talking to the blockchain, and that part is decentralized. So the payments piece is decentralized or whatever. So it really, there's a lot of choices to be made. I will say if you're going to go pure decentralized, there's not a lot of great options for building apps on top of that. And you know, just like you suggested, like should we open up the work that we've done to other people and help them build other apps, and I think that's happening already. I mean, there's a platform called Blockstack, which is basically you know, like a framework for building decentralized web apps on top of the blockchain, and a lot of people are finding that is a good way to start building those things. And then a lot of people are building on top of Ethereum by you know, building like web apps, and they have a lot of really great developer tools that make it easier to build these things. So I think the situation's getting better, but you know, it's not an easy technology. I will say that. I mean, it's been over 10 years now since Bitcoin has been out, and it's still not easy to understand. And most of the apps out there are pretty garbage. I mean, the ideas are really cool, but they're just hard to use, or they use confusing terminology. It's a weird landscape.
So like I said, like you know, the reason why decentralized finance is taking off is because there's a real use case for people. It's like, I'm paying, they're giving me 2% of my money, same money I put into a decentralized finance, whatever, Compound, Dharma, I'm going to be making 5 times more money. Like, boom, I can understand that, right? And so the question would be like, for these decentralized models, like these decentralized architecture, you know, what are some of these use cases that you know, now healthcare, right? Healthcare, people are like, hey, let's decentralize that. Why? Right? Why would that be better to decentralize versus a centralized where they have a lot of like controls and they give you the most flexibility to control your data, right? I'm just trying to think like in your mind, because you are at the forefront of this whole decentralized movement. Like, again, can you kind of give us like, you know, maybe top 5 use cases you think might be, you know, that's going to be the next customers for this API you guys are going to build out?
Sure. So, I mean, I think it's kind of like cliche to say like everything should be blockchain. Like that we kind of went through that for a couple of years when everything was blowing up in 2017. You know, people are just trying to put everything on the blockchain, and that doesn't really necessarily make sense. It's just kind of like, you know, does it make sense to use peer-to-peer or anything for all these different services? No, it doesn't always make sense. I think in terms of things like healthcare, you know, they're hoping that, you know, things will lower costs or make it more private, but it doesn't necessarily just come baked in. Use cases that I think will be really popular in the future, obviously you hit one, is decentralized finance. I mean, it's just so hard to do some of these things on the traditional systems. Like, if I want to loan money to someone in South Africa and I want to get a good rate on it and I want to be able to like pull it out at any time, like, that is impossible with like normal banking. Either that or there'd just be like all these rules and you just never do it, right? So with DeFi, it's like possible instantly. Yeah. And then also, you know, platforms like ours, shopping. I mean, I bought things from people all over the world, and while shipping is difficult because logistics are hard to solve with the blockchain, but like, you know, just the physical shipping things, you know, being able to purchase and sell and promote things and get those in the hands of other people is like super simple. It's just instant, and everybody gets to use the same currency, and you can turn around and reinvest it back into the community. So, you know, those kinds of things are just not impossible, or just not possible 10 years ago. Other really interesting areas.
What about like supply chain, like VeChain, you know? Because their value prop again was like the order of magnitudes. Like every time there's an E. coli breakout, usually it takes like average like 22 days. Because what they'll do is they'll like yank everything out and then slowly introduce it 22 days later. Like, right? Yeah. Versus if you had the supply chain, like knowing what products came from where, like you can literally find that out in 2 seconds and then take them out, right? And then you didn't have to do the whole like axe.
I mean, I'm not completely sold on the idea just because I think it's still somewhat of a human problem, right? Like people still have to put that data somewhere or like enter that. And it's more of an accessibility problem, right? Like it's like people right now can't make those decisions because the data is siloed and it's in some Excel sheet somewhere over here, and then I have to ask for it and all that. So I think there is some merit to like figuring out a way to make that data more accessible to more places. But I don't necessarily agree that it has to be the blockchain. I mean, the blockchain was created as a way to create a unchangeable ledger of data, right? Like it's perfect for things like a bank account, right? Because you're just transferring back and forth and tracking it. And then it kind of evolved into Ethereum, which was like, now we're building a world's computer. And it's like, we're jamming everything into the blockchain. And they're like paying for it now because it's not super scalable and they're trying to figure out a way to do it. It's a great idea, but it's like the execution is not quite there.
Most of the traffic is DeFi actually for Ethereum.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when ICOs were happening and people were doing token sales, and it would literally shut the whole blockchain down because people were trying to get into that sale and there was only so much throughput. There was only so many options. And I think someone paid like a $43,000 fee on a transaction just so they could be the first person to get into the sale, which is crazy. And if you're just trying to send $10 to a friend and someone's paying a $43,000 fee, of course they're going to get prioritized over you, and then you're going to wait how long? So it becomes more like a denial of service. So yeah, there are some things that are good for blockchains and some things that are not.
I wanted to, so I'm going to leave some time for some Q&A because I'm sure there's a lot of smart people that have some questions here, but I have a few other questions. What do you think is the most important company in this space besides your own?
Besides my own?
Yeah.
It's a tough one because I think there are several companies in different areas that are really important. I mean, I mentioned one, Brave, which initially I was not super sure about, but the fact that they're addressing such a dire need and creating a secure browser and then allowing people to monetize their attention on that is really valuable. I think it's kind of changing the way that people think about advertising and selling of their data. Coinbase is another really huge one. I think because they are so regulatory focused and they're so, the goal of trying to be like kind of this JP Morgan of like crypto and following all the rules, it provides a safe place for people to go and experiment with crypto and like really understand what it's about and get onboarded. And so I think that's super valuable. And if they become the first crypto company to IPO, that's another big advancement for the industry to show people that it can build businesses on this like really nascent technology. And then there are other platforms like Binance, which are figuring out how to circumvent a lot of those rules outside of the U.S. and like growing in that respect so that the U.S. will look at that and say, hey, if we want to compete, we got to figure out how to get clarity around cryptocurrency and like what we think about it, because we're still operating under all these like really old, out-of-date laws. So, yeah.
Actually, I asked that question before. There was other questions, but I wanted to ask about so back to OpenBazaar, right? Because, essentially you're creating the next Silk Road. Like, aren't you, have like the FBI come out, knock on your door, saying, hey man, we've got some nefarious transaction, you need to shut this down. Like what, how do you even react to that? Like, because, there's going to be like future OpenBazaar types of apps out there where they're like, hey, something nefarious happened, we need to shut this down. Like, how do you resolve that as a company? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think, number one, you're just very transparent about what you're trying to do. As Donald Trump has proven, you can just tell him what you're doing and get away with it.
Trump hotels right across here, right?
No, but seriously, like, our code is open source, our plans are open source, it's mostly code, people operate it. By being decentralized, we don't really operate servers hosting data, so, if you were to download the app and say, I'm going to just sell a bunch of weed on here, like, that doesn't like come into our systems, like, and we don't like foster that or like get transaction fees for.
Which is why Silk Road got shut down, because they actually held customers' monies, right? Like they were.
I mean, they were
transactions.
helping with disputes, between drug dealers and drug buyers, and then taking money for that service and promoting things. So, I mean, it's a completely different situation. I mean, it's naive to say that people won't use these technologies for negative things, but the idea is that if everybody's using them, the minorities are the minorities. I mean, there's nothing about Amazon or eBay or Craigslist that stops people from doing it. People are trafficked on those platforms. People sell drugs on those platforms.
Right.
And what happens? They go through it, they filter it out, they sort it out. They provide protections to users, and that's the same kind of thing that we do. Like, we have to go through the platform and kind of provide ways for people to filter that stuff out. And from time to time we do get engaged by law enforcement. One particular instance that's happened several times is Germany has very strong anti-Nazi legislation. Like, they take it very seriously. If you try to sell Nazi emblems on a t-shirt or a hat, or you talk about it, they hate it. And we've gotten letters from them to say, hey, this person is selling Nazi memorabilia on your website. And at first it was very hard to talk with them about it because they didn't understand the technology. Like, they were like, just take it down. And we're like, well, it's not. And they're like, we don't care, just take it down. And like, can't take it down, like, it's not possible. And I've been very...
What did you guys do in that situation?
I mean, I've been very heartened because we did finally get to a point where we could explain what was going on, and they were like, okay, well, what can we do here? And they educated themselves on like what it was possible. And I don't think that they were probably super thrilled about it, but it probably opened their eyes to the fact that this kind of stuff is going to exist, and they need to figure out different ways of tackling it.
So this kind of brings the other question about, like Apple and Google, right? Like, I mean, you just saw the news about the government saying, oh, Facebook, don't do end-to-end encryption because, child pornography, right? Which is like, okay, I understand that, but really they're trying to find a back door, for the software. So like, would they do something very similar to you guys, where it's like, hey, in the future, create us a back door for your software? But again, it's your source code is open source, so it's like people can see if there is a back door or not, right?
Well, you have to think about like why they would bend to that pressure. I mean, ultimately they have shareholders, they're centralized, they have to keep making profit, they're a single business entity. If they take away their business license, they can't do that anymore or whatever. But now imagine Facebook is 100,000 people all over the world, some of whom you don't even know who they are. They're completely anonymous, and they're all sharing the profits, and they're generating it through a protocol. How is law enforcement or how are regulators going to go in there and stop that? There's no leverage. They have to shut the network down in order to do that. And now you can have your opinion on whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but it's happening. It's going to happen. And businesses like Facebook and stuff will probably slowly start getting replaced by these alternative technologies as they get better, because people will finally get sick of having to deal with that, and if the technology's there, they're going to find it. So, but I think centralized businesses do have advantages that keep them competitive. We learned that with music industry, right? Like, music industry forever, fought technology. They didn't want to like move to this new technology. They didn't want to have to figure out new business models, and they started to get their lunch eaten by Napster and LimeWire and all these guys. But then they came along and they created a much more optimized, better experience for people that they were willing to pay for. And then it kind of blew away the business model. It wasn't worth it to get free movies if you have to go to all these porn websites and go through their ads and try and like figure out where the download was, and maybe it's a virus and maybe it's not, right? Like, it was a bad user experience. And I think decentralized apps will see that same fate if they can't focus on user experience and get it to a place where it can compete effectively with centralized counterparts.
Do you think eventually the government says, you know what, because there's nefarious activities happening, we're just going to make it illegal for you to even run it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would be very honest with you. Like, if tomorrow the government said it's illegal to own Bitcoin, if we catch you with it, it's a felony, you're going to jail. You will see Bitcoin like dry up pretty fast, I think. But the problem with doing those kinds of things is that it starts to force it underground, creates like a negative incentive, right? Rather than everybody using this technology and figuring out positive ways to use it, now only criminals are going to be using it, and they're going to exploit it, and that's all it's going to be used for. And so we're going to squander this really amazing technology by forcing it into the dark. That's not really what we want. We'd rather have these people out in the open where we can like have more data and track them better. You know, I mean, that's the way it is with these darknet marketplace, or like going on Tor and finding these dark nets. You know, like now we force these child pornography sites and all these services into the dark net where it's harder to find them. Right. And it's a huge challenge for law enforcement, right? But that's the reality of it.
So last question, and then I'll open up. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions on the audience. Where do you see the future of OB1? Like, where do you see OB1 in 5 years and 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, our goal right now is to try and get it into as many hands as possible around the world, and I think we're starting to do a much better job of that, especially now that we're on mobile. In fact, I would say like the top 5 countries that use our app at the moment are like, it goes like US, Canada, I mean, you could probably lump Europe as a group, and then it basically goes Venezuela, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam. I mean, it's like all these countries where they have like super big reason to worry about like the value of what they're earning. And, you know, we've done pilots in Argentina and in other places where, you know, people realize, they start to see that like if I sell something for $10 today, you know, it may be worth $2 because of my government next week, you know, but if I have it in Bitcoin, I could turn it into DAI and I could lend it and maybe it's worth $12 next week, you know, or maybe just the price of Bitcoin goes up. You know, this is super powerful. I mean, you're creating a whole new generation of wealth for people potentially, and the only way we're going to get there is by creating apps like Haven and others that are super simple. Like people don't have to go, oh, I have to go read a book on cryptocurrencies and like decentralized networks in order to use this. No, they start it up, and like you said, it runs on their device, and the government can't shut it down, and they're just operating. And people are so surprised that this actually is possible. I mean, we've gotten emails from people in Iran that are like, am I allowed to use this? And we're like, you are. I mean, like, we can't stop you, you know? Like, well, can't you shut my account down? I'm like, you never registered for anything. It's all on your device. You're talking to people directly. If you sell something with somebody in India, that happens between you and India. We never know about it. So it's a really, really powerful paradigm shift, and I think once more and more things kind of get converted to this technology, the world's going to be a much smaller place for sure.
Okay, we're going to open up for Q&A. So I think we have only time for maybe 2 questions. So, all right, you got a question? All right, sure.
I got a quick question. I'm trying to understand, how do you make money, number one, and when do you think Bitcoin is going to go back to 20 grand?
I'm surprised, Brian, you never asked this question too already.
I already know the answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, the answer is that OpenBazaar, like the core technology, will probably never make money. The idea is to keep it free and open source forever. And in fact, if we added some kind of fee into that, it'd probably just get ripped out and people would start a new project without it. And that happens from time to time. So the idea for us is like, we want people to build on top of the platform, build services and things. So for OB1, like we built a mobile app that runs on top of it, and it actually has additional features and things on top of it. You can kind of think of it like a pro account, makes it easier for merchants to use the network, or has social networking capability and things like that are not part of the marketplace. And that's how you monetize that. And we've also built like a search engine where people can promote their listings, sort of like Instagram boosts. You can pay like $5 and boost your listing and get it in front of more people and monetize that. And we feel like that's a better way to earn things rather than just forcing people to pay a fee. Like eBay charges you 10 to 15% or whatever of your sale, but like what are you getting for that really? You're getting the luxury of you being on eBay. There's no inherent value there other than being there. And if the marketplace can be decentralized, you shouldn't have to pay for that. Other models that may work for people doing similar things are around tokens. So maybe you earn tokens for selling things or buying things, or participating in the marketplace, storing data for people, things like that. And that becomes a monetizable business as well. But for us, yeah, it's mostly around the mobile app right now. And when is Bitcoin going to get to 20,000? I don't know. It could happen soon. I mean, we're in one of the longest flat ruts in the history of Bitcoin. And but I will tell you, I remember when it was $100, and I was thinking, how do I get this into something different because it's not doing anything? And now look where we're at. So when it happens, yeah, we won't know. It'll happen really fast, I think.
All right, just to be fair, I did ask, I had that the business model question, but we got distracted.
Okay.
So I did have
Let's go off the hook.
So I'll let Carol, she has a question. She's actually one of the top lawyers in this space, so like, Carol.
Hey, Brian. I know we've had some conversations along this line before, but
Yes.
I guess I understand OpenBazaar doesn't make money off of the transactions. You're building things above that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the SEC, Department of Justice, have both taken the position that there's really nothing that's really truly decentralized at this point. So I won't ask you the question of whether that keeps you up at night as a possibility. I mean, it's nice to tell the Germans to go pound sand, but at the end of the day, if something really goes wrong. I guess one of the questions I have is that with the, I don't know how many of you are aware of chainalysis and the technology they've built for mapping the Bitcoin universe. Does that change in any way some of the responsibilities and so on if they see a lot of activity coming in from Iran, for example?
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised you even answered an email from Iran, given the sanctions. I guess, how does that, is that, the greater transparency into where the money movement's happening, coming in or out of OpenBazaar, does that have any kind of impact? And then one other question is, with the advent of stable coins, do you see that having some impact in the way the transactions are done on OpenBazaar?
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of questions there. The first one, I think, was regarding I'll answer the Iran one because I remember that one right now. Yeah, so I kind of was like very loose and fast with the way that we responded to the email. I mean, generally the way we respond to this, and we get emails all the time with sensitive topics like drug dealers that, this guy didn't give me my cocaine and I get my money back, which A, is not even possible, and B, you generally don't respond to those or you even report them if there's enough information for something to happen on. The Iranian one is generally like, look, this open source software is provided on GitHub. That's it. Sorry. That's your choice. And that's what I kind of meant by saying, you are using the app, we don't provide it through the, I don't even know how they got it, because we provide through the Play Store and we provide through the App Store, which, because of OFAC, they don't even offer it there. So somebody's giving it out. And then, in terms of the decentralized, I think the first question was around decentralization. You're right. You're completely right. And that's what I meant with the Bitcoin piece. It's it's decentralized, but the government bans it and it's over. And for us, if the government wants to come and shut down OB1, who knows? They could figure out a way to close our business down and cause problems for us. The thing that we rely on in terms of decentralization is that the code is out there. So if we go away, just because I'm in jail does not mean that OpenBazaar code is not available to anybody who wants to run it, and then they can deviate from whatever we're doing and fix it and make it more unstoppable. I don't know. But yeah, it does worry us, and it has for many years, but we've been doing it for about 5 years, and we haven't really run into any issues because generally we try to keep the protocol pure. We don't charge fees, we don't participate in sales activities, we don't do dispute resolution for people, we don't do anything other than provide code that people can run on their machines. And the mobile devices, the mobile app is a lot different for us, and it's actually been a new experience because the app stores are so strict that it has caused us to put additional layers on top of OpenBazaar and create a different experience. So the desktop OpenBazaar, because you're running it all on your own, it's a much more raw experience. In fact, you can add your own custom search engines where there are unfiltered, uncensored search engines on it, whereas the mobile app is only our search engine, which we actually do crawl and filter illegal listings. We don't, you're not going to find anything horrible in there, or we hope you won't. and we'll get to it quickly, so people can report those things. Creates a much better experience, and it complies with iOS and US laws. So.
And their third question was stable coins.
Oh,
So
and
crypto to crypto transaction.
Yeah, the third one was actually Chainalysis.
Oh, Chainalysis, sorry.
Yeah, and I know Johnny,
Four
kudos to his team because they email us all the time asking if we'd love their services, and we're like, hell no, we don't want you tracking our users. But that's another reason why we offer several different types of coins on the platform with different kinds of risk profiles, right? So with Bitcoin, which is obviously super transparent and easy to track, we also have Zcash, which is like a privacy coin, right? So it allows you to do that, and we like to explore additional ones as well, that, perhaps Monero and others that give people a little bit more sense of privacy, because even if they are just tracking and looking for illegal activities, there's places where even if you're doing lawful transactions, you could be in trouble or targeted for some reason. So looking at ways of improving that. And then stablecoins is actually interesting that you brought that up, because we're in final testing for Ether and DAI for payments, which I think is really fascinating, because right now, if you sell something for Bitcoin, by the time you realize you have a sale and you fulfill that sale over a couple of days by shipping things, and then they release the money to you, Bitcoin may be down 30% and you just lost 30% on your sale. If you sell it in DAI, $10 is $10, and I think that creates a much better experience for users. So we're hoping that will improve the user experience going forward.
And the reason why that's important just for the audience who don't know about stablecoin is because it stabilizes value, right?
Yeah.
There's a snapshot, I bought it, great, I got it for $10.50, right?
Yeah.
And it's crypto to crypto, right? You didn't have to do from Bitcoin to fiat and back to Bitcoin, right? So.
Yeah, so for instance, the reason why those were kind of created in the first place was, if you're on a platform and you're trading Bitcoin and you're trading it for Litecoin and back to Bitcoin and back to Litecoin, and then you want to, you don't want to leave it in your trading account and let it go up and down based on the volatility. You want to put it somewhere stable. So people used to just take it out and put it back into US dollars, but every time you do that, it's a taxable event. And so they're like, well, can we use crypto to figure out a way to not be in that situation? So you move it into a stable coin, it's still crypto, but it's stable. $100 will stay $100 as long as you want it to, and then when you want to trade it, you can move it into something volatile. So it kind of solves that problem, but the side effect is that you can use it in other use cases, sort of like e-commerce and things like that, where you want the price to be stable, and you don't want to price things in 0.000425685, coins or whatever.
So anybody who wants to know more about stablecoin, talk to Carol. She's worried actually.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in stablecoins, so that's about the extent of my knowledge.
So we got to wrap this up. So one last question, actually two. And we always ask this question to all of our Start Grind speaker. If you can go back 15 years, what would be the single best piece of advice you would have given yourself?
Do an ICO. It's sad, but it's kind of true, because building a technology that doesn't have a clear business model, even though I'm telling you about this business model, it's still built on top of a decentralized network, which is very small. It's a niche audience. It's not easily monetizable, right? But it's run by a venture-backed business who want to see results that look similar to centralized businesses. I think that's very challenging. Whereas a token sale, if we had done one in a way that some of these companies have gotten away with it, we work with a company, Protocol Labs, they raised $250 million. Their teams now, when we both our Union Square and Andressen Horowitz invested, they raised $5 million and we raised, I think, $3 million at the time, and then now they have $253 million in their bank account, and we have a lot less, and we have to go back and raise more money, right? So it's a much different situation. They have 150 employees around the world, and they can do whatever they want. They have infinite runway, essentially. So that is something that seems regrettable, but they kind of went against our ideology at the time. So it's principles or money. I don't know. Right. There might have been a better choice.
And then the last question, and I always think that this is probably the most important. Ready?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite superhero? and slash historical figure and why? I put in
Super-
historical figure because one of my past speakers was like, superhero's so stupid. That's a stupid question. But I had to say historical figure. Just if you
Oh
want
my
to
God.
I was like,
Superhero. I don't know. I think it's probably, and it's probably a common one. I mean, it's Batman. I mean, he's one of the few that just doesn't have. He wasn't born with that powers, right? Like he made himself into what he was, and I think that is very representative of, people, like us. I mean, we're not, not necessarily born with magical powers. We have to like turn our lives into what we want them to be. So, yeah.
Now I was going to say, like, if we had to describe what Bitcoin, what it parallels to a superhero, it's probably Batman, stealthy, mysterious.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe,
okay, well,
maybe he's Satoshi.
yeah,
Batman.
exactly. Well, thank you for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. Brian Hoffman.
Thank you.